Hi, my name is David Bose. I am the Communications and Marketing Director for Washington Policy Center, and this is Washington Policies on the Go. It's our I was about to say every week, but it's bi-weekly now. With the legislative session over, we come to you every other week with a new interview with our center directors, then an update on what's happening with state policy and with WPC research, and any other key information that you need to know. I always urge you, of course, to check in on our website at washingtonpolicy.org. Our blogs are updated almost daily, if not daily or even more often, with key information and key analysis that you just don't find anywhere else or is difficult to find. There's a great new blog by Todd Myers detailing how certain information has disappeared from the state website regarding the impact on gas prices for due to the Climate Commitment Act, so-called. Washington Policy Center was predicting that based on the estimated cost of a metric ton of carbon last year, at the end of last year, that we would see a 46-cent per gallon cost of increase in gas. And the governor said it would be only pennies, a penny. And right now, Washington State is 40 cents above Idaho and Oregon. So, the question is why? Why is Washington State's gas so much higher than our neighbor's gas? And some of the key claims that the state was making that this policy wouldn't impact gas prices the way Washington Policy Center was saying, those statements have disappeared from the site or been slightly modified. But that slight modification changes the meaning entirely. And you can see that on our blog right now at washingtonpolicy.org. Today, we'll be speaking with Liv Finne, our Center for Education Director, about some of what she's found that is happening in the schools in terms of superintendent salary and how voters have reacted of late to measures being requested by districts for more money. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the unexpected revenue the state has received and what may or may not happen with that. We'll also speak first with Pam Lewison. She is our Center for Agriculture Director, and she has an update for us now on a topic that we did some coverage of it. I think it was earlier this year, and you talked about waiting for this court decision to come down on WOTUS, the waters of the United States, and the decision is made. So we're happy to have Pam on to talk about what happened there. Pam, why don't you give us just a quick recap of what was at stake and what waters of the United States mean?
So what was really at stake here was a precedent that was set approximately 20 years ago. So for just a quick recap, waters of the U.S. has been coined for a long time. It's part of the Clean Water Act, and effectively it has been applied in different ways depending on the presidential administration we've had in place. So sometimes it's lakes, rivers, streams, and the ocean until you get into international waters. Sometimes it is all of those things, plus wetlands, ephemeral streams, which are seasonal, or ephemeral ponds, lakes, creeks, etc. And so this ruling really necked down what waters of the U.S. means and how we apply it, specifically to land development in the case of wetlands. For people who don't follow it, this particular case centered around a couple who's trying to build a house on property they bought across the road from Priest Lake in Idaho. And they've been trying to build a house there for nearly 20 years. The EPA said that they had identified a wetland on the couple's property, and that wetland had a significant nexus, which means a significant connection to the lake, which is considered a navigable waterway. The problem with that is There doesn't appear to be much of a visible wetland on this property. And what wetland there is drains into a stream that is not navigable, which drains into another stream and eventually makes its way to the lake after a fairly circuitous route. And so what the Supreme Court decided was that in this particular instance, waters of the US needs to be applied and significant nexus needs to be applied specifically to contiguous bodies of water rather than something that stair steps and gets eventually there. And I was reminded of the scene in Finding Nemo where all drains lead to the ocean. So it takes, it's a fairly glib stance, but to a certain extent, everything eventually gets to a navigable waterway. So what this says is, we have a line, and if you have a wetland, it needs to be touching that navigable waterway before it's considered having a significant nexus.
Yeah, I think in your blog, I think it was Alito that you quoted, who was basically saying, that the jurisdiction has become so vast for the federal government based on this, on these nebulous definitions and ever-changing definitions, that there's just hundreds of millions of acres everywhere. That
I think that's part of the problem, is that the EPA has essentially applied this significant nexus rule to virtually everything, including in one instance, a body of water that is more than 20 miles away. So is it significant? I think I would argue that it isn't, because you can't even see it from its end point. Again, everything eventually will get to a navigable waterway. And that has been the broad interpretation that the the EPA has used for quite some time. The problem with something that broad is that it means you can interpret literally everything as waters of the US, including irrigation ditches and drainage that goes into sewers.
And it fits a pattern that has been remarked on a number of times about government agencies in general, where if you leave definitions vague and you allow that kind of thing, eventually, because there's a habit in government agencies to measure themselves based on how much bigger they get and how much more power they have. It means that over time they'll continue, they'll just like a blob, continue to grow and grow and collect more, all in the name of doing good, but it becomes unwieldy. And if somebody's trying to do something like build their home, suddenly they're facing, the restrictions that are impossible for them to interpret, to deal with. I also appreciated the quote that you shared where they were saying, for most laws, you don't have to hire a consultant to find out if it applies to you or not, or a couple of consultants in this case.
And I think that's something, to me, that was the most poignant part of Alito's decision for the majority. Basically, he's saying, look, we should have laws that are easy to interpret for a regular person. And I think in the instance of WOTUS in particular, that's never been the case. It has never been easy for a private landowner or developer or anyone else, for that matter, to determine what really constitutes waters of the US under the Clean Water Act. And because it's been so vague, that interpretation has continued to evolve and change. And I think, interestingly, really the people who win in this decision, aside from the couple trying to build their home, are regular people who will be potentially in that same position sometime from now.
I was wondering, one of the things when I read your blog was I was wondering, because of the way it was framed, that the waterway with this Idaho couple was actually connected to the lake. If it was a victory for them, or if it wasn't, but from what it sounds like, the connection was pretty circuitous, even though they are across the street. But it was, some kind of swamp that connected to a ditch, that connected to a stream, that connected to the lake. So it really wasn't.
Definitely, it's not just across the road, it's across the road and across a development to get to the lake. So there's already housing there.
Yeah.
And I can imagine how irksome it would be as a landowner to look across the road and see other people living their life on the lake.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to build a house and you're told that you can't because someday, somehow, the trickle of water from your property is going to manage to make itself, integrate itself into the lake that is across the way from you.
So were they first stopped by local authorities, or is it the federal authorities that stepped in?
They had started to backfill, this little bit of a boggy spot on their place when the EPA came in and said, you can't do that.
Okay.
We will be fining you $40,000 a day until you fix it because you have disrupted the environment. And so, and kudos to them for saying, as a matter of fact, we haven't done anything that we shouldn't be doing, and we'll fight you for it. But, it's unfortunate that it's dragged on as long as it has, and that they have not just one expert or two to figure out whether or not they have a significant nexus, but several attorneys and, going from a local court to district court to circuit court and onto the Supreme Court to finally get an answer.
Well, I hope they get fees too after this lengthy fight. And so overall, it seems to me that this should simplify building and should simplify a lot of things on regulation. Should be a savings for state governments because it means state governments can more easily focus on what matters, or should be focused on what matters. And same with builders, and private property owners around the country. They should be able to focus on, they should have a more understandable and limited reach with this kind of complexity.
I think it should provide some clarity, certainly about what waters of the U.S. means. But I think, the hard part is in Washington, a lot of our rules are a lot more stringent than the EPA's rules even. So because our state rules often err more conservative than federal rules, I'll be curious to see how this actually shakes out on a state level. Because we're one of the few states that are more restrictive in how we interpret water and environmental law in general.
I had a friend who had a ditch that was filled with water, much like in our chat. One of our audience members, Tom, has written, every time it rains significantly, I get a pond along my gravel driveway for a few days. No migratory fish or frogs, though. But I have a friend who had a drainage ditch that was put in so that the hay would stay drier longer in the hay fields, and there was never water in it except in the winter and after it rained, but it was just kind of soppy ground at best, and then his development was strictly curtailed based on something that somebody had put in there as a drainage tool, and that's the kind of complexity we face in Washington State, where people regret kinds of actions that were done to make things better. I've even known people who've created ponds in order to create habitat for ducks and frogs and wildlife and things, and then discover that they've created a much more difficult problem for themselves when it comes to selling their property. So,
and that's what makes Tom's comment interesting. Is so for many, many years, navigable waters, as part of Waters of the U.S. and the Clean Water Act, included a component where the EPA would say, will a migratory bird land on this body of water, or will frogs or other wildlife live in it? And that actually became part of their benchmark process for determining whether or not it was waters of the U.S. in this, very lengthy and complicated evaluating process they have. But the migratory bird and frog component of that was removed, and it became sort of just this arbitrary decision that was made regionally. So if you happen to live in an area where the regional EPA office was relatively friendly to landowners, you didn't have to worry about it. But if you lived somewhere, ostensibly like the Pacific Northwest, EPA regulators are much more stern about their interpretation of that. And so you were faced with more challenges than maybe folks elsewhere.
Isn't that just the way the law should be? Just totally so vague that it just depends on who the civil administrator is, whether you're going to be in trouble or not. It's a frightening prospect when you think about, when these private property people are threatened with $40,000 a day fines. It makes you wonder if you did something where there was a friendly EPA administrator, and then suddenly, let's say that guy got sick or decided, you know what, I'm going to retire, and somebody else takes command. And suddenly she's saying, well, wait, this wasn't allowed at all. And you're facing $40,000 a day. Most people are not going to take the risk that this couple did and bring it all the way to the Supreme Court. You're going to say, you know what, this is not worth my risk. I'm out of here. So yeah, kudos to them for bringing this all the way. And I know you've been following this closely, so it's probably a satisfying win in your book.
It's funny. I joked that the first day that I took off this year with paid time off was the Supreme Court ruled about WOTUS. But I was delighted to spend half a day going back to work to read the opinions and see that they had ruled in a positive way for not just, I think, obviously the couple, but for everyone who ever worries about whether or not the EPA is going to stop by their door and tell them that they have waters of the U.S. on their land.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pam. Appreciate the update on that. And I know you've been following it closely. Everybody can read more at washingtonpolicy.org and ask any further questions you might have. Thanks, Pam. Yeah, and then a quick reminder, you can ask a question anytime using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. So if you have a question, let us know, particularly now that we're going to bring in our Center for Education Director, Liv Finne, to talk about some of her latest work. Liv, your latest blog was about a number of education ballot measures levies that were put up, and they got trounced one after the other. 5 out of 5. I mean, it's like a Chicago Bulls sweep of a series here. And with this time the voters saying, you know what, we're not interested in doing this. Why do you think that pattern is persisting?
Well, it was quite striking to see all 5 bond measures fail. And I think it reflects a certain skepticism in the members of the public about where the money is going in public education. Why is it that they want so much money? And these bond measures are really, some of them are really over the top. They're asking for a lot of debt, asking property owners to incur long-term debt to fund very large building construction that the public doesn't think that the schools actually need. So, plus the public has heard that the schools have failed the children during COVID. They're well aware that the schools were closed for a couple of years. People are unhappy that so many children are behind in their learning because of the schools' extended closures here, especially here in Washington State. And they're also unhappy with what they hear that the schools are not teaching in the classroom. So it's a way, what can people do to register their displeasure at the cost of their property taxes going up so high. People do not think, oh, this increase in my property taxes for operating expenses for the schools, that was really high. Remember in 2018, we saw our property taxes jump then to pay operating costs, and then they come after us for school construction costs. I think we're reaching some limit of fatigue here, that the public cannot take on more taxes, and this is just an expression of that sentiment. It doesn't surprise me. I expect to see districts continue to have trouble raising money for these expensive building programs that everybody knows it's not the building that educates the child, it's the teacher in front of the classroom.
Yeah, my taxes went through the roof last year, and I was not
Yeah.
pleased by that at all.
No,
No. Yeah, and I just look at it and I wonder, how do they expect people, and never mind fixed income, it doesn't really matter. I mean, everybody has a certain amount of fixed income. If
Yes.
your property taxes are going up that fast, well
Yes.
beyond what your salary's going up,
yes.
and how are
Exactly.
people supposed to keep up with that? So
Yes,
insane.
and is the service increasing? No, but we see efforts to reduce the number of hours of instruction in the classroom. So people hear about this and they say, what the heck is going on? Why do I have to pay more and get less, you know?
That reminds me, you pointed out that, what was it, 40% of the students in Washington State aren't achieving their
Oh,
grade level?
yes, in K, there's an OSPI report, a recent one, that revealed that 40% of all K through 4 students in Washington State are behind grade level in reading. And that's a recent report from the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so what do they say to us? Give us more money.
It's incredible to me. But you also pointed out that some of the superintendents, while they were asking for more money, the pay, and this was funny to me because I actually used, about a week ago, I was on vacation in Arizona. I met a half sister of mine I hadn't ever met before, and she was she had, I think, just got her master's degree in school administration, was going to become a school administrator. And I said, you should get out of Arizona and come to Washington, because that's where all the money, that's where all the money is. And I was showing your work there, and people were just shocked in Arizona how high the salaries were, relatively speaking, to what they were in Arizona. I mean, it's way beyond what people are paying elsewhere. So why don't you describe that for us here?
Dave, that is great that you lead me in with that, because I have a blog post that I'm going to post after this meeting that discusses the huge windfall that the state just got from the unconstitutional state income tax. They call it capital gains tax. You're well aware of that tax. Yeah. Well, last week there was a report out that said that the officials have collected triple the amount of money they expected to collect. They expected to collect something like $250 million from the about 3,000 individuals that paid this tax in Washington State, and they instead got $840 million. And so I have this blog post, so you can read about it later if you're interested, on our website. But the activists who celebrated this, this woman named Mackey, I think that's her name, said this. She had this amazingly dishonest comment that was reported in the newspaper. Here, I'm going to just read it. She said, "This news shows what we have said all along. We have the ability to fully fund our education system when we ask the wealthy to come to the table like the rest of us and pay what they truly owe in taxes." And that statement is dishonest and deceptive on a couple of levels, and it's also undemocratic. First of all, the wealthy are not being asked to come to the table. They're being forced to pay, okay, under threat of a penalty from the State Department of Revenue. So nobody's being asked to join a table. It's not a voluntary thing. It is by force of law, they're being required to pay this extra tax. And then to say that the schools are not fully funded. So for a citizen to say that you should pay, some other citizen should pay more in taxes is undemocratic. We supposedly elect our representatives to decide what taxes we pay. But the other part that really enraged me was this claim that the schools are not fully funded. Dave, the schools have plenty of money. They are fully funded. And so in my blog post, I lay out all the money that is in the public schools. And one of the things that is being said right now about this huge amount that's been collected is, oh, we need it for school construction. Well, they don't mention the fact that in the current budget, they've provided $588 million in the capital fund, in the capital budget for school construction. They have plenty of money to build all the schools they want from the taxes we already pay, and we do not need these extra taxes. So of course I was looking around to see, 85% of the money that is spent in the schools is spent on the pay and benefits of the adults in the system. So I just was searching around on the official government websites to see, well, what are they paying these superintendents? You're talking about the superintendents. And I found that there was a superintendent in the small, tiny district of Sunnyside in the Yakima Valley that has a whole total of, I think it was 6 schools, maybe 9 schools, tiny, 6,000 students. This superintendent was making over $500,000 in 2021, $560,000. And I'm putting up the list of the top paid superintendents across Washington State with this blog post. And he's the only one making over 500,000, but there's a whole bunch that are making over 400,000, and they're not in the biggest districts either. So it's just clearly an outrage. So, okay, so you say, all right, we have 295 districts. There's 295 superintendents raking in the cash and not delivering results. So what about the teachers? Those are the people that we care about. Are they getting substantially paid? Well, it turns out on a ranking I found, Washington State teachers are ranked, their salary is ranked 5th highest in the nation. Okay, well over 88,000 according to this ranking, but the records I have show that they're getting paid on average $125,000 pay and benefits on average statewide in the most recent reports. So teachers are getting paid well. They're not getting paid based on their merit, because the pay scale is based one size fits all. If you are a certain age, a certain experience, you get the same pay. If you're an excellent teacher, then the worst teacher with the same experience and same background. So it's just an unfair system of pay, but the amount of pay is quite generous. So for these activists like this Mackey woman, saying we haven't fully funded the schools and we must go after people in our society that have money in order to fully fund the schools, it's just so dishonest. It's so tiresome, and it really needs to stop, because that is what's leading to these school bond failures. As you started out with that, I think that's a great point. The public has to approve these levies, these bond levies and operating levies, and the public hears that there are people that are taking advantage of the system and not delivering what they should be.
I just keep thinking of, most people don't get the retirement benefit. I mean, I know it's not all a defined benefit now, but there's still a significant defined benefit retirement plan for public employees, which is rarely taken into account as far as, that's a benefit that surpasses almost any private company. The
life insurance and health benefits, teachers get very generous benefits that the private sector do not get, but don't dismiss the fact that they can't be fired either after they've worked for 3 years. They essentially can't be fired.
Right. So, and if you fail to teach the kids, and I'm not saying it's all their fault, there's parental and socio issues that deal with that as well. But, as a superintendent, if you're the manager of a company and the products, that you're reducing your sales, you're losing market share or other things, there's immediate feedback, whether you're doing a good job or not, and your value is there. For the schools, what's the feedback? I mean, it doesn't matter if this kid's
there's no accountability.
You're
spot on, Dave. There is no accountability. We as a society can't hold them accountable. All we can do is give them more money. They demand more money. And a monopoly system like this, the way it's set up, there's no check and balance. I mean, I get particularly irked by these superintendents, because their job is to manage these budgets, okay, and to steward and to protect the tax dollars that we earn and send them, and make sure that it's spent well and not given away to overgenerous pay and benefits that then force them to cut programs for students. So you remember, just in the last month, we've heard about the Edmonds school district cutting the band program for the kids there. And why is that? Because they gave double-digit pay increases to the teachers, and they can't afford the band program from the students. So this is just outrageous. And they apparently had a meeting that went on until 1 a.m. that night. The community is so outraged. So what do you expect is going to happen when the next school levy is put before the Edmonds, public?
It's the band and arts programs that get hacked.
Yes.
Anything that's popular with parents Yeah, they would get rid of football too if football wasn't more. Football tends to self-sustain
Yes.
because of the revenue it brings in.
Yes.
But it's pathetic how that works. But it's manipulation. Like you
Yes.
say, when you negotiate a contract that you can't keep paying because your budget shows you right there in black and white that you're not going to be able to pay that, there should be consequences. I can't
Yes.
imagine a private sector person negotiating with a firm, to deliver things that they couldn't pay for. I mean,
Exactly.
it's just
No,
beyond
exactly.
measure. So, quick question came in from Janice. What's currently the cost of public education for one child now?
Okay, so the amount of money we're spending per student on average statewide is $19,000 in this school year. That's just on average, which means there are some districts that spend a bit less and some districts that spend more. And Seattle Public Schools is spending $22,600 per student, okay, in the Seattle Public Schools. So this is just, they've never had so much money, yet they're cutting programs for students. That should tell people everything they need to know. And that's why you see, and after COVID, the people's appreciation for this lack of accountability became clear, okay, across the country. And so what's happening in other states is amazing. There are now, in the last 2 years since COVID, 7 states have passed universal school choice programs, which basically breaks the monopoly schools and gives parents an alternative, and now parents can apply for public funding to to homeschool their kids or send their kids to private school. And I'll say the states, I'm memorizing them. I can remember: Iowa, Utah, Arkansas, Arizona, Florida, and then 2 more, Oklahoma, and a 7th, which I can't remember, and I will be in my blog. But this number of students is significant. Now many millions more students will be newly eligible to use public funding to go to private school. And this is upturning the whole establishment. You can imagine what Randy Weingarten is saying, and what the unions and what the bureaucrats in the districts are thinking. We've got problems. There is another model for public education, and that is put the parents in charge of the money, let them choose schools that are actually teaching kids how to read properly. I mean, really, who are not teaching, hateful theories like critical race theory as truth when it's actually an unproven theory, and all kinds of stuff that's happening in the schools right now that's alarming everyone. So they're bringing these schools are bringing this upon themselves because they know full well that they should not be doing some of these things, and that they should be protecting the public's money and not giving out overly generous pay and benefit increases. They should be teaching children how to read properly with proven methods of teaching reading, and same for math. They know how to do this properly. They just don't feel like it. So why should they? No one can make them.
Just thinking with the critical race theory on, the separation of kids and collective guilt instead of not proven, maybe discredited is the way to go. Yeah. Because I feel like that racial idiocy was dealt with a while back, and we could focus on moving beyond that now would make more sense to me.
Well, it's also illegal and unconstitutional. So they've put in this, like you say, discredited theory as teaching it as truth. And now we're seeing problems with the mental health of kids. I mean, what do you think is going to happen when you tell kids they're bad because of the colors of their skin? And you see people not applying to work to volunteer into our military service. Well, you're telling them that America is a terrible country. Why should they risk their lives to defend it? Okay, so the schools are now taking steps to undermine our democracy, and no wonder people are upset. So you see all kinds of people running for school board now that didn't before. I'm being asked all the time, what can we do? What kind of resolution can we pass if we get a school board that agrees that these ideas are bad? How can we push back? How can we bring school? Dave, I get calls from mothers saying, gee, I have heard about getting money to homeschool my own children or going to private school. Can you show me how I can do that? And I have to tell them, I'm so sorry. It was introduced in the legislature, but the people in control there don't want it. So you can't get it. Now that's a hard one for me to do.
because it
Yeah.
means that they've heard that that's possible, but they can't get it here yet.
Quick question from Heidi. Why does Washington State seem to consistently underestimate the amount of revenue that comes from new taxes? You just discussed the two gas carbon tax, capital gains tax. You brought it up that we've got a ton of new revenue from the capital gains tax. That's an income tax in every single state and region in the world except for Washington State, where they're calling it the excise tax thanks to the court. But we've got all this money. Why do you think that happens?
That's a great question. And someone else asked that question and I was thinking about it. I think that if you were, I think it's a self-interest thing. If you were a government official saying, well, we're going to impose a new tax on you, you don't want to be held accountable. You want to underestimate how much it's going to be. It's just in their own interest. And,
right. That way, when the tax passes, let's say it's, we'll use a simple, $10. This tax is going to go up $10. Well, $10 is not, it's just pennies throughout.
Exactly.
It's just nothing. And then, as it turns out, the tax was $1,000. Well, now suddenly you're talking about money people will remember. But if it can be old news, like the tax passed a few years ago, now it's up. There's that frog in the slowly warming pot of water theory. And the media is like that too, where they'll do the initial report, which is pennies, and they'll let them get away with that. And then there's, the follow-up doesn't get the headline, whereas the follow-up is the real story in a lot of this kind of thing.
Yes, exactly right. And this is done deliberately, of course. They always ask for, just a little bit more that when the budget negotiations, when the governor comes with his budget and when the majority party comes with its budget, they ask for 6, 7, 8% more, 10%. Within reach if you add some new taxes, but it's just an incremental amount. It's like boiling the frog in the media. It's the same idea. It's like we remember with Todd and the governor saying, "Oh, it's just going to be pennies to pay on your gas tax," and it turns out to be 46 cents a gallon. That's not just pennies. So that's the problem with overly large government that thinks it's going to solve every problem in the world by adding taxes and control our behavior accordingly by penalizing us with all these costs. And it's just not a democratic way, open-minded, creative way to govern. It's very restrictive and it's mean-spirited, that, singling out wealthy people to pay more taxes. They already pay all the taxes. If they just look at what wealthy people pay, it's some huge percentage of the total taxes that we collect. So now we're going to penalize them some more. It means we'll lose the wealthy people that are helping with the venture capital startups here in Washington State, all the creative new medicines that are being developed here. Those companies depend on our wealthy taxpayers to pay these startup ventures that deliver us such benefits to our society. So what we'll have in the end is fewer benefits, certainly here in Washington, because these wealthy people can move other places to protect their assets, and it's a rational thing to do.
And a lot of them, their motivation is take that money and put it back into new ventures and create things, because that's what drives them. And if they can't do that here, they can do it somewhere else.
Yes.
And it's an interesting perspective. I saw something online recently where there was someone making the same kind of claim that the quote unquote rich need to be punished because they're benefiting from the rest of us, and then they were asked about whether or not they agreed with that on a global scale, and they were like, absolutely. Well, and then they were confronted with, on a global scale, if you make more than $35,000 a year, you're rich, and so maybe everybody should be just punished on some kind of global scale and have redistribution going on. So it was an interesting perspective switch. It's not really for this conversation, but I thought it was really, really fascinating. Quick question from Tom comes in. What's the current status of reading and arithmetic capabilities of our students in Washington?
Well, so the latest test scores that came out from last spring show that 51% passed the state test in reading of our students. That means 49% failed the state test in reading. And the math test, only 38% passed the test, which means 62% failed the test in math. And these are minimal standards to 8th grade levels, something like that. Of course, they're averaged across all the grades. Third grade, the tests are given in 3rd through 8th grade, and then once again in high school. So this is a huge average, but that's what it shows statewide, and it's obviously not good. And I looked into this. It turns out that even before COVID, we never got better than 60% students reading and 50% passing in math. So there's been large segments of our students are being graduated out of our schools without without passing our state tests. What does that tell you?
Yeah, that reminded me of the story out of Texas over the weekend, where there was a school with, I think, with 5 kids that were eligible to graduate. So they delayed graduations and were providing extra classes for other students to try and get more of these kids to graduate. The school was very small. I think it was like 35 kids in the school.
Yeah.
But still, it was an atrocious result. However, I kept thinking of your work, showing the with kids not reaching the state standard, which is supposed to be kind of a minimum, or that's the way they build it, minimum standards for grade level, and we graduate them all the time, telling them, hey, well, you're out of here, and then where does that leave them in terms of opportunity? And so I watched that, and I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if others did more tutoring or extra classes or summer school to get kids caught up to that level, so that when they graduated, they had their full arsenal of potential ready to go instead of just being cut loose.
Well, exactly. And so there's an economist at Stanford at the Hoover Institution named Eric Hanishek, who's an expert, respected guy in the education area. And he wrote a study after COVID, which compared the performance of the states on the national test, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. And then he projected the loss in earnings that the children in those different states would suffer because they did not get what they needed to get for those 2 years during COVID. And he estimated that for Washington State, because we were closed, longer than 46 other states, basically 2 years of missed instruction, or low quality, mediocre online instruction. This Professor Hanishek estimated that Washington students would suffer a lifetime cost of 7% lower income earnings. So that's a tangible thing. So we're pushing children through knowing they're going to have fewer opportunities to acquire skills after high school, and they will earn less. That's what happened over COVID. And if this ever happens again, boy, we should be screaming and yelling, never do this again to our children. But there was another thing you said. There was something else that I wanted to say. Oh, what made me think when you said the word tutoring, helping this school that you were mentioning, tutoring makes all the difference. And everybody knows this. Individual tutoring will help the child catch up. And there was a bill before the legislature introduced by Representative Stokesbury and Rood, who suggested, let's just give parents, let's require the schools to notify the parents of every child who fails these state tests. Now, isn't that an interesting idea? Let's notify the families so they know. And offer them a stipend of $500 per child so they can hire an individual tutor. And that bill is a great idea. It's not a huge amount of money. Let's just say half of the students in the state would get that, let's say, at $500. That's 500,000 students times 500. What is that? $25 million? Even if it's $250 million, that's well worth it. And would have made all the difference in the lives of these children to help them catch up their COVID learning loss. But that bill was not even given a hearing this last session. And here we have $840 million surplus from this one tax. So it just tells you the priorities are misplaced.
Yeah, and it's also, there's this idea that keeps percolating, and I see it in the Como poll that we shared, where they're asking people whether they would support taxpayer dollars to go to private schools for kids. There's that word private. People kind of panic about it. The superintendent of public instruction loves to bring it up like a boogeyman. And yet, in all other circumstances, if you have something that's being delivered, you don't fear that. If somebody said, hey, somebody has a government benefit for healthcare, but they're going to a private doctor to receive care, people would be like, yes, because they felt like that was the best specialist for them. They would do that. If you said, a school district got money, but they're paying a private company to go fix the heating system, nobody would care. It's like, well, of course that. There's other heating companies out there. They probably got a good deal, but then when it comes to delivery system of education, and somebody says, well, there's my students really focused on these things. They can get a great education here that really inspires them. They feel safer, whatever it is. Then suddenly it's this public-private. They're trying to privatize. Well, the goal is the public goal is to educate. Not necessarily to have all delivery systems.
Oh, but, that's such a good point. They act like you said a swear word. It makes me think. I mean no disrespect, but it makes me think of those fainting goats. That you.
Yeah.
And they fall over dead, and that's exactly how they behave. As if they don't buy paper from private companies, as if they don't buy gas for the public schools are buying things from the public sector the private sector all the time. And
kids get private lessons for things all the time, like violin lessons, piano lessons. They get, I feel like my kids are signed up for a half dozen things.
The school, exactly. And the school itself, the system itself recognizes in these cases of children that are very handicapped and can't or have terrible special needs the school system itself can't address, they acknowledge this and give public funding to those families so they can send these children to private schools that can help them deal with their problems. And so here the school system acknowledges that the private sector can provide services that it can't, and yet it won't let families make this decision because it must control all of them.
I was going to say the GI Bill does it for higher education, but then school teachers and superintendents do it through their own wallet because they send their kids to private schools so often.
Yes.
We know it's not that scary. So
no, it's not.
We're out of time, Liv, but appreciate you coming on, especially today at short notice. Todd had some issues he had to take care of, and really fascinating stuff. Great work on that. Five out of 5. That's quite a sweep. Should send a pretty strong message. Yeah, appreciate it. Just remember, everybody, check out the Washington Policy Center blog at washingtonpolicy.org. Liv's posting there all the time. So is Todd and Chris Gorey and all of our staff here at Washington Policy Center. Hope you'll check that out on a daily basis, because that's where you're going to get the news, the local news about Washington state policy that you need to know, and that needs to be shared. It doesn't do us any good if we just hold on to it, and zealously keep that information to ourselves. Our information is meant to be shared. That's why all of Washington Policy Center's research publications are available online and free. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of Washington Policy on the Go.